we used to talk about we are stardust. Do you remember that? We are stardust. Isn't it strange that the world of science and the world of hippie stuff seem to have come together? As I've got older and science has started to look at things that we once thought were alternative, we're now looking at a point where all those alive today are, who are, say, let's say under 60, who have a good chance of luck being on their side to live another 20 years perhaps, are going to face a situation for the first time in the history of humanity where we realized we really are stardust. When you look at the internal biome of the human, the bacterial inner workings, and then you look at the work that's coming out of it, especially North America, but now Britain is rapidly catching up in terms of mycorrhiza and the fungal structures of the soil, the so-called wood wide web, and you realize they are one and the same family. We're living at a time where humans are really going to suddenly be given the opportunity to realize that we are part of nature, not apart from nature. So as opposed to it being middle-aged blokes predominantly making speeches with sanctimonious waggy fingers about how we're all doomed, which has never persuaded anybody that the world could be changed, I just think we're on the verge of a brand new green enlightenment. Now, my version of that enlightenment is pretty similar, I know already, from so many who are watching today. I am a firm believer in natural philosophy, that wonderful concept which got destroyed by science. 1834 was the dread year that the word science got used. And after that, intellect started to colonize the world. You know what you had? You had physicists, you had biologists, you had zoologists, you had chemists, and then you had geochemists. And then they broke down their facts, and we colonized that knowledge to the point where we knew absolutely everything about small things, or we were progressing towards a point of small things. And everybody forgot that in order for us to have a bigger vision, we needed to put that Humpty Dumpty back together again. So for me and for Eden Education, our hero is all the king's people, because we're now no longer men. It's all the king's people and all the king's horses putting Humpty back together again. And that is what the Eden Education program is actually about. And that is why the environment is absolutely critical. The best book I think I have ever read, and if you haven't read it, please do, is Pandemonium by Humphrey Jennings. It was the book that inspired Danny Boyle to do the 2012 opening ceremony. And the book is an astonishing worldview that he was writing a book about the history of the Industrial Revolution. And you'll see, if you're looking at me, you'll see a wonderful picture behind my head here of the steelworks at Colville, which are next to Blaenavon. In 1867, 23% of the GDP of the British Isles came from about 8 square miles. That's where steel was invented. Well, what is brilliant about this book is it tells the story of the Industrial Revolution as it was lived by those who were going through it. It showed the age of enlightenment in terms of correspondence between people who were living. It came as a huge shock to me to discover that Isaac Newton, for example, was not that impressed with having discovered and written up gravity. He thought that was quite a trivial thing. And he was more concerned with trying to find out what caused bioluminescence in the shell of a beetle. And he was also very interested about the nature of sound. Was it a matter of friction, or was it something that was inherent? Anyway, this book builds up this picture of us, all of us watching today, about how a whole thought process developed, how we taxonomically started to order the world so that we could understand it. I take you forward a long time to last year, to the 100th birthday of Jim Lovelock, probably the greatest living scientist. Jim, as you will know, invented, or rather gave words to Gaia theory, the idea that the planet was a living system. And I was fortunate enough to go to a series of lectures that were being put on in his honor. And we were having a cup of tea together, and I said to him, do you think the major laws of nature have been understood? Because most scientists will say, yeah. And he said, well, at 100 years old, I am continually bothered by the sense there's one great law of nature that we are missing. We're just missing it. I don't know what it is, but we're missing it. There's this great thing that's coming, it's just out of touch. What a challenge that is. So if you take the learnings of the new enlightenment, what would you look at in the future? What would you do if you discounted the views of most middle-aged men who are responsible for most of the problems we have? What would you do? You realize that men traditionally like to write history as if there were no shocks involved. Almost everything that's worth having was a shock. But what happens? I'll give you a tester. Go out for a drink with a banker anywhere in Britain today, and you will find that these bankers who did not see anything happening in 2008, by now will have discovered that they were there. They knew it. They were a happening thing. They saw it before everybody else. It's just like people who get invited to garden parties by, for the Buckingham Palace. Most people who go will never see the Queen, but within 6 months, by the time they're home, they will be describing the long conversations they had with Her Majesty. That is the way humans are, the way they write the story of their life. So I will try and tell you a story that is really, really different. I believe that the next 10 years are going to be utterly shocking. So shocking that it will make you laugh when you hear people like Boris Johnson, because you will realize in 10 years' time, he is exactly like those bankers. And I didn't mean that as a political jibe at a political party. It's to do with the fact that the purpose of today is to talk about the environment, okay? Oil is dying as a business. Electric cars are coming in at a speed which is the same speed as which the smartphone took off. But most people are talking about, wouldn't it be great if by 2040, maybe even 2030, we get rid of diesel and petrol cars? Believe me, by 2023, there will be no factories anywhere in the world of large scale making combustion engines. Then you'll have electric cars at a speed which you wouldn't believe. Did you know that General Motors spent something like $200 million last year on social anthropology? Why? Because they know that the world is changing so rapidly that probably within the next few years, probably 50% of us will not want to own our own cars. We will want to share cars. So we've got electric cars, we've got shared cars, we've got cities that are clogged up and clogging up our lungs. But what is going to happen if you're a property developer? Buy those houses that are alongside those really noisy, fumy streets. If you live in London, go to Hanger Lane and buy houses. Be a stinking capitalist and make a lot of money. Because before the next 10 years are out, our cities will start to become villages again. The tarmac will be ripped up. There will not be garages everywhere because there won't be motor accidents. And most electric cars have only got 13 parts. So all of those jobs will go. All of them will go. The world will be just different. But because of our desire for meaning and belonging, look what happened in Madrid when they took out the motorway that was in the middle of Madrid. It cost billions. Everybody protested. It was a bit like the Angel of the North. People wanted to go to the cross to stop it. Now there'll be a revolution if you tried to get rid of it. The middle of Madrid, everybody walks now. People can't believe how livable this place is. And it's starting to happen in Milan. It will happen in London soon. So the motor vehicle, that's going to change everything. Just imagine half of the tarmac on our streets of Britain being ripped up. Farmland being given back. Is it farmland? Let's talk about farms. If you read a report called The Future of Farming by Rethink X, they paint a picture that within 7 years from today, in fact, it's 6 years from today, we will find that big agriculture will be on its knees. Evidence? Look at the fastest growing stocks in West Coast America, in the clean meat industry. The 3 fastest growing, $1.7 billion turnover last year, is clean meat, which is the slang word for artificial meat. And they're now at a point where the artificial meat industry is very close to reproducing all of the classic meat cuts that you expect. Why are they doing that? Why is it going to be so big? Which country is now starting to work on it big time? The Eden Project has 2 projects in China, at Qingdao and at Tianjin. The president of China has a saying, which he says to each botanic institution: heal the soil, heal the soul. Every major state-owned enterprise in China has to have a sustainability teacher. The country is going through an incredible morphing. Are you aware that in 2015-16, 16-17, 17-18, 18-19, each of those years, China planted and propagated more trees than in the rest of the world put together? Yes, it is still a dirty country, but that's by virtue of its enormous size. They also produce more solar than any country in the world. They produce more wind than any country in the world. And they are aghast at how our little nation that once led the world in that sort of thing actually allowed ourselves to have a political class that did not see the future and actually gave its excuses for not investing in it, that China and India were so polluting that it wasn't worth it. Anyway, we've now caught up. The cellulose technology is going amazingly fast. If I was to tell you that the fermentation bins that you use in making cider, making cider or distilling, are now being used by collecting proteins from the air. This isn't science fiction. This isn't Soylent Green. They are producing milk protein for a third, 33% of the cost of dairy. What do you think the impact of that is going to be on big dairy? Artificial dairy, right? Artificial dairy is going to be enormous. Within 10 years, the big beef herds of the USA, of the rest of Europe, will go. Big agriculture will die. Clean meat will take over. It doesn't mean that we won't eat meat as treats and all the rest of it. I'm not actually coming at you from that perspective. But it means that in this post-Brexit settlement, whatever your views before it, we are faced with an opportunity of unbelievable magnitude. We're going to be looking at the land. I'm looking out at fields right now, and they look really good. They're the sort of things that we call countryside. Isn't it funny? We call it countryside, those green fields with the little few twiggies things on the side and the field boundaries. That's not countryside. Those are all human-made. All those fields are human-made. Real countryside would have a lot of trees. It would have a lot of silviculture, a lot of hedgerow. What you're going to get over the next 5 years in the UK is a massive rebalancing in terms of the way we look at agriculture, so that we start to look at the soil in terms of soil enrichment, water porosity, meaning the degree to which water will be absorbed by that soil. We will be looking at biomass generation, and we will also, by which I mean the sheer quantity of green stuff that's photosynthesizing, that is growing. And we will be looking through that soil enrichment at a huge biodiversity gain. The hedgerows will fatten, and we will be paying our farmers properly to become stewards of the countryside. And why would we do that? All right, a statistic to tell every youngster. Did you know that in Roman days, the carbon in the soil was roughly double what it is today? It means that if you look at the world's agricultural land and you imagine a people who suddenly realize that they are part of nature rather than apart from it, transforming their farmland to be both very, very productive, but also ridding ourselves of the fossil fuel injections, which have actually so damaged that soil, both for its porosity, but also for its friability, so it blows off everywhere. Leave aside the chemicals and nutrients and phosphates that have run into our rivers and have done such enormous damage. We're looking at a potential moment of green salvation. This whole thing about the meat industry dying and the impact of agriculture on carbon is astonishing, because when you break down, I didn't know this until very recently, so I'm not speaking like some wizened greybeard who knew this. The input into CO2 is 71% fossil fuel. What happens is, because we break it up and say it's X amount agriculture, X amount aircraft, X amount, but you forget that the fact that it was all energy. So that if we can actually have an energy revolution alongside our agricultural revolution, we could, if we then allied that to water technology, cleaning our water, we could actually, within the next 20 years, cure our carbon situation. Now, I'm saying this is a radical postulation, and I'm saying it deliberately. I'm fortunate in my job. I meet wonderful people. I met this incredible guy up in Edinburgh who recycles 37% of all of the glass in Scotland. And he's produced the best filtering system in the world, because although he's now wealthy, he's got this moral desire to get this filtering system all over the world so everybody can have access to clean water. And he says to me, he says, you know, the water that is in our rivers and is in our main water suppliers, if you filled a German swimming pool with it, it'd be closed down immediately. Why? Because we've allowed our water companies to get away effectively with a sort of soft murder. They used sand filtration systems that were actually prescribed in the very early 1900s, which are now way out of date. If we had good filtering systems on our water, we wouldn't be putting the 80,000 chemicals that flow into our rivers into the ocean. And if those chemicals didn't go into the ocean and didn't start to bond with microplastics, we wouldn't be killing coral reefs and we wouldn't be killing phyto and zooplankton. And just imagine, if you look at the mathematics of the regrowth of phytoplankton and zooplankton, if they're uninterfered with, they almost grow exponentially. And what do? They absorb carbon. This is actually unbelievably simple. If we hadn't, and I go back to this, if we hadn't let middle-aged men dominate our thinking culture and our establishments, we would have said, what on earth are we doing as a nation of citizens, allowing people to pour filth into our rivers and put it into our sky and damaging our soil? We're mad, but we're all waking up. That's the good news. We're waking up, and if we stop seeing it as a dystopian world, but a wonderful opportunity, we then start to think of our youngsters. Crikey, our youngsters, I have the privilege of going like you do. I mean, I go to lots of schools. You don't need to be worried about the future. There's a lot of really, really smart people there, amazingly smart people in these schools. And if we can find a mechanism of holding hands, as all of us are interested in this subject, and lauding teachers, and admitting that none of us know all of this stuff, and get rid of all our insecurities about what we don't know and how we get found out. We're all imposters. Is there anybody on this call who doesn't feel like an imposter? I do. Every day I wake up and I say, Christ, they must have mistaken me for somebody else. But you know what? It's one of my favorite questions of people who run enormous big companies. They all feel like imposters, because actually we're all normal people. And this pandemic has been great because most of us normal people have had to get a lot of communication on the web and not getting into aircraft and all of that sort of stuff. That's important. But, you know, I think the most important thing has been that I don't think since I was 5 years old, maybe 6, have I actually had the pleasure of day by day watching the seasons unfold, you know, from March, early spring, and then going into the summer, and then now autumn and going into winter. Having this slowing down, well, why do we call it slowing down? But actually being aware of the rhythm of nature suddenly makes you realize, crikey, why do I feel good seeing this? Why do I feel really good feeling that the seasons just go through, and they each have this wonderful bouquet, each their own? It's very interesting. Those of you who've read Darragh McAnulty's marvelous book, you know, The Diary of a Young Naturalist, I was recommended it, and I watched him on the Hay Literary Festival having a chat, and I bought the book. And in the first page, a friend of mine, Professor Mike DePledge, whose specialism all his life has been nature and the environment, when I told him what Darragh had written in his first page, he said, crikey, what an insight. What Darragh said, I paraphrase to do him justice. He said, I am very autistic. When you are autistic, you find the behavior of human beings completely puzzling, because what they say and what they mean seem to be so different. And what they argue about is very often not the thing that they're actually angry about. They're finding other things. It's a complete puzzle. I went and discovered nature and fell in love with nature, because when you go into nature, it makes sense. The cycles, the rhythms of the natural world, they reset me because they're constant, they're solid. So that quite obviously is what inspires us, say, at the Eden Project in Morecambe, which has been an incredible thing. When we haven't built it yet, we're in the design stage of it, but it's so humbling to go to this marvelous, once famous seaside town, Bradford. You know, it was Bradford-on-Sea. It was built for wool workers from Bradford, and they drove a railway line right the way across, and it's had better days. But when you stand on the front at Morecambe and you look out across the incredible Morecambe Bay, I mean, Morecambe Bay is such a gift of nature. If you've never been there, you must go. The speed with which the tide comes in can outpace a man. In fact, it can outpace a horse. But watching it, and while you're looking across it at the Lake District, and you're watching the fells and then the mountains appear in the Lake District, and you can actually see weather systems developing, and the wind is blowing in your face, and you look out with the tears sort of going down your face because it's actually that windy on the day that I'm describing, and you just feel, crikey, this is like a canvas on which to explain to people the majesty of the natural world. Why is it that the Lion King, circle of life, just it feels such a natural thing, doesn't it? Okay, it's Disney and it's cliched and all the rest of it, but actually cliches, I noticed when I was in the music industry, cliches are often used as a kind of one-upmanship. Oh, that's a cliche, I'm a bit better than you. I'm into that band that no one can pronounce and plays music in really funny keys. But actually the Moonlight Sonata, it's a cliche. Oh, is it? Actually, it's a bloody lovely piece of music, and it will always be a lovely piece of music. And I think those of us who like the occasional cliche should stand up for cliches. And when you see the natural world in its majesty like that, you can't but feel A, well, B, profoundly humble, and then you ask all sorts of difficult questions. Last May, not the one we just had, the May before, I did something unbelievably brave in a very cowardly way. But my son, I got invited to climb the biggest tree in the world in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and I hate heights. And my son said, "Dad, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity." And I rather feared that he was right. That didn't make it better. Anyway, I found myself by this tree, and we climbed this tree right to the top. It's about 320 feet up. And at the top of it, you can look one way right across Sequoia National Park, and it's just total green with a little bit of bronze in it from the dying pine trees, but mainly green. Then look left, and in the distance, you see Death Valley. And you know what hits you when you're on the top of this tree, grateful that you're clinging to it as the ultimate tree hugger, is suddenly my background was as an archaeologist. And is this weird sense that you're on the top of a tree that's 4,000 years old. And that tree had outlived, to my knowledge, probably many more, but to my knowledge, from what I know, 37 different human civilizations that had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that makes you think, doesn't it? Each one of those civilizations would have been full of people like us who become an establishment and then screw it up. Shouldn't that tell us something about what would happen then if we put our faith in teachers as opposed to middle-aged men? Eh? What would happen? I'm not saying there aren't some very good middle-aged men teachers. That's not, what I'm saying. It's just that we've got it wrong so often, and we're faced with this extraordinary opportunity to reimagine ourselves as part of the natural world. And once people get used to it, they realize that it has a meaning to them. I mean, I go all over the place just like you do. And I was recently in Eastbourne, a town I like very much because it's got this rap of being a place where old people go on holiday. And when you actually go there, it's not like that at all. It's got this horseshoe design with the most beautiful marshes in the middle of it. And all their schools have got into natural history. And as you may know, I'm a huge fan of the natural history GCSE, which Mary Colwell has been championing with OCR. And the enthusiasm down there is absolutely astonishing. And you suddenly think, you know what? We could just do this amazing teaching art piece, create a Copacabana of natural history from one side of Eastbourne to the other, up to the South Downs. And people say, "Oh, Tim, you're a dreamer." Yes, I am a dreamer. And the thing that really pisses me off the most is all those people who think they're cleverer, the thing that you can't have dreams. Dreams aren't for the like of you. I always say kill negative people, which always goes down really badly with people who are into HR. But actually, I won't have them anywhere near me because they're like alien spawn. And the problem is the dreams that all of us who are watching this program should be having, should be giving, putting air under the wings of, right? We're talked out of them by people whose dreams were not that great. I was reading the introduction to Neil Gaiman's new book this morning over breakfast, and the guy who wrote, I've forgotten his name actually, but the guy who's writing the introduction was saying part of the problem is the Protestant ethic. Protestants have actually persuaded themselves that the imagination is something for children. Afterwards, you've got to get grown up. No, it bloody isn't. The imagination is for all of us. I did this TV show where I was asked by ITV down here 3 years after the Brexit vote what I felt now. And I was in a grumpy old man mood. So I said, you know what? You're really boring me. I can't tell me how boring you are. And this was live, so they couldn't cut me off. I said, I have been dying for one of you to ask the only intelligent question worth asking me. I was a Remainer. The question you should have asked me is not how cross am I or what's wrong. You should have said something generous and brilliant, which is, what would it have taken to get you in the most amazing question? And I said, I've got the answer. If you'd stood up and said, we're going to make our country food independent, we're going to become energy independent, we're going to cut budgets everywhere.
5 minutes, Tim.
Yeah, I saw your lovely thing. To be honest, I was a bit disappointed that you didn't do the. Yeah,
I toned it down.
I feel so uplifted. No, that's marvelous. So, but the thing is, we need to hold on to a dream. That's why the Edge Foundation is so important, because they've given wind to dreams. But we ought to say, actually, it is not an impossible dream to give every young person in this country an experience, not of being in the natural world as if it was out there, but of being in their natural world, as in every young person has the right to go to places, has the right to grow things, and actually will grow things and learn to cook these darn things. Because in my view, if everybody studied natural history all over the world would not be in the mess it is in today. And if everybody understood the natural world and learned to cook and grow things, you've then got the basis for an independent person. I would argue that if you know maths, history, and geography, and you can quote Shakespeare and think you're educated, I think you are sorely ill-educated. We've got to actually let our young people become independent and realize that all that generosity that comes from the land around us. If you want another tip for a book, read The Knowledge. The Knowledge. Any of you who haven't read this, it's by Lewis Dartnell, and it's such a clever premise. Imagine it's apocalypse yesterday, and the premise isn't how are you going to survive? The premise is how are you going to thrive? How are you going to protect your civilization? And it is stunning. I must admit, I read it and the hair stood up on the back of my neck, because it said, after camping out near a city for a while and pillaging tins and all the rest of it, you then realize you need to know about the soil, you need to know about the land, you need to know how to grow things, and you need to know which things grow and which will keep you alive. You need to know how to create a little bit of energy, how to keep things cool, and so on. It builds up a world of knowledge to create the civilization we're in. Now, look, I have ranted, but I've ranted for a reason, because I think, we need to work out a way of, as an entire profession of mentor teachers, people who support teachers, how can we create that social cachet and dignity? Crikey, if the most valuable thing you have in your life is a child, surely the person you are giving your child to educate must be the most important profession in the world, mustn't it? Mustn't it? Come on, it must be. So I leave you with the thought that we must keep as many middle-aged men, except those who get an honorary license to not have to call themselves that, away from this stuff, that we really dare to dream very big about a 15-year blitz on education and the environment. And also to realize that the jobs of the future are being made around us. I've described a changing world, and it's utterly radical. We need people for whom growing things does not feel as if you're the third thickest child of the third thickest child. We should all be able to grow things. The horticultural college should be beaten over the head for allowing themselves to betray this great thing. Horticulture is a science, an applied science, every bit as important as engineering, medicine, and pharmacy. We've got to get people growing again and realizing that our future is going to depend on every man, woman, and child being able to see growing for what it is. It's nurturing, stewarding a planet of which there is only one, to the best of my knowledge. And by so doing, it will also make us well. Thank you for listening to me. I hope my rant has made some sort of sense. You can see I'm passionate about this, and any revolution you guys want to start, count me in. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And there's so much love coming in through the comments box down there about how inspiring and terrific and enlightening it was. And who doesn't love a cliche? I think politicians couldn't give speeches if we weren't allowed to use cliches. So I think that was fantastic. I loved what you were talking about, the green enlightenment and the speed of change, and how we need to be prepared for a decade full of shocks. And the idea that our cities can become villages again, and nature can take back over, maybe take back control even of the cities around us. And you know, and I have to say, I won't comment too much on HR professionals, but be aware of alien spawn is quite a good motto in which to live our lives. you so much for that, children of the revolution. So we're going to have a look now at a video, but I just want to quickly name the children who are involved in it. These are amazing young people from across Edge's network that have used the environment in their learning, and they include Alfie Lockie from the XP School pupil in Doncaster Secondary, Anthony Carloli from the UWC Atlantic College in Wales, Elizabeth Wayne and Claudia Pugh. They're from the second year in their BSc Horticulture, Garden and Landscape Design degree with the Eden Project, Cornwall. Looking forward to this video, and please stay there, Tim, because you're going to be joining us back in a moment. So thank you. Over to the pupils.
Tony, a huge warm welcome to you. Where are you based and what have you been up to?
I'm currently based at UWC Atlantic in South Wales, working as a volunteer, trying to do my best to help out with the curriculum development at UWC Atlantic, helping out the different sort of module leaders.
Hi, my name's Libby and I'm Claudia. We're doing horticulture here, we're doing the garden and landscape design route. We're on site at the Eden Project.
So I'm Alfie Lockie. I go to XP School and I'm quite interested in that kind of plants, botany, mycology, all things to do with the natural world. I've always been interested in trying to grow stuff on. Yes, so XP works on the basis of expeditionary learning. We can all work together to create a product or something that's like will last and have a lasting impact.
We tend to have like lectures or in the classrooms, in the foundation building or the labs, and then usually at lunch walk down to the biome. So we were down there taking cuttings and we've got a couple of trays in the lab seeing how best to propagate them. There's a huge range of plants here that you wouldn't really grow outside. And it's quite a unique environment because it is a whole biome, not just little plants in pots that you get in the greenhouse. And obviously being next to the setting, the Eden Project, it's very easy to go out and find an example of what we're being taught about in class. So if we're looking at the morphology of different plants, it's very easy to walk between the two different biomes and see how you might have big leaves in the rainforest biome with drip tips and small silver-leaf plants in the Mediterranean biome and see, all those lessons in practice, which I think is really good. Yeah, so it's not just a PowerPoint, you can go and see examples.
So this year, students were able to choose which sub-module of the Changemaker curriculum they would like to help with and experience. So there's everything from dialogue and peacemaking to coastal margins and reconnecting with nature as a separate module. And it's been really wonderful sort of seeing the students engaged in a learning experience that's not mandatory. We've
got like little art installations to sort of talk about or represent the stuff we learned during that term. It could be made of wood, it could be we've got these big like decorated paving tiles outside that are all made by the students.
The obvious point of education is, acquiring new information, but to me the more important part of education is just learning about yourself in the context of the environment you're in.
XP does help a lot with public speaking, and so it helps you get rid of these fears. For example, if we can't really advocate for helping the environment, if we're too scared to speak up.
As a student here, I got really involved with the outdoor department, and I tried a lot of different outdoor activities, and I found out that I was actually really passionate about being outside and doing adventurous activities in the environment that I really cared about.
Maybe a head gardener, some sort of job where I'm really physically interacting with the plants, being outside most of the time. What I was doing before, and I find it very motivating. That's really what I want to do. I want to be outside. I think I might like to go on to do a master's somewhere, and then I'd quite like to go into garden design and working in a practice or in designing specific gardens for sites.
Since the environment's such an important thing, we need to teach and sort of ensure the next generation knows more about the environment or how to help the environment, so then we can actually do that in the future and possibly avert a climate crisis or stop it in its tracks.
I think getting people engaged in interacting with nature and gardening, especially for students who aren't really academically inclined, I think that would be a really helpful thing. I think just, being informed and making the best choices that you can as a person as an individual.
You don't have to pay anything to leave the classroom and just go out, sit on the grass. I think it's really beneficial from everyone. They like a change of environment, and there's so much to talk about when you're outside. If you put a tiny bit of effort in, no matter what you're teaching, I think you can find a link to nature.
To get really hands-on and really inspired, I think that's a really good way to help people learn.
Fantastic. That really is inspiring and reminds me why I've spent so much of my life working with children, because it's impossible to be a pessimist. You can only be an optimist when you work with children, because they are so fantastic. So now it's time to meet the panel. So George, just before I come to you, I'm going to quickly introduce George. So George Lamb spent the first half of his professional career working in the entertainment industry, first as a band manager and lately as a TV and radio presenter. And he's been figuring out since then how to use his position and influence to make a positive, meaningful and lasting impact on society. So in 2018, he founded GROW, which is a life skills education program that works in schools and communities to promote mental well-being, physical health, and a more hands-on relationship with nature. And he also helps runs the Southport Legends Youth Basketball Academy as well, which sounds incredibly exciting. So George, how did you get involved in education and setting up GROW?
Hi, everybody. Firstly, Tim, I just want to say thank you so much. What a shot in the arm that was. Just really lovely to hear you talk and to get all that wisdom off one of the elders. So thank you, man. It's really beautiful. And yeah, kill all negative people. So, yeah, how did I come to GROW? In about 2012, 2013, I recognised that I wasn't really contributing to much outside of myself and my immediate family. I was tired of opening the newspaper or turning on the television and just getting all this doom and gloom. And I had to take stock of what I was doing and what I was actually contributing to society. And at that point, I was making game shows. And frankly, you know, game shows are distraction for poor people. That's basically what they are. And that didn't sit very well with me. And I decided I wanted to try and change stuff. And I got heavily embedded into community work, and then realized quite quickly that there was seemingly a kind of never-ending supply of half-dead bodies coming down the river that you could fish out and put a blanket on and give a cup of tea to. And so I did that for a bit, and I totally see the merit in that, but that's just not where I operate at my best. And I wanted to go upstream and see what was happening at a systems level, which meant that there was, you know, this never-ending supply of people in need. And I came to the conclusion that if we were going to change things, the only way, you know, given that, you know, short of the building being on fire, you can't get adults to go in one direction at the same time. So the only way we were going to change things is through education. And then I made my decision I was going to get into education. I called my friend who was running a big secondary school that had been having a tough time for about 15, 20 years. He'd come in, he was the fifth head teacher in 4 years. They were down, they should have had 1,200 kids. They were down to less than 500. It was really, you know, in a kind of tough situation. And I knew I wanted to get involved, but I was very definitely looking at that stage at kind of disengaged, disenfranchised groups of people. And then I read a book called How Soon Is Now, which is about the ecological mega crisis. This is pre-XR and pre-Greta. And so it was a bunch of information that I'd seen, you know, coming through the media, but easily swatting away 50 harvests left and 4%, you know, increase in temperature and all that rest of that stuff. And all of a sudden, for whatever reason, on that day, all of that information just landed on me on my sofa. And I realized that actually, if we didn't all radically shift our behavior and all focus on this one thing, which frankly is the only kind of unifying thing that we all have, because of our mutual interdependence on planet Earth's health, then actually all bets were off. And also, just to give some context, my mum's a gardener, and so then I realised actually my mum had been right all along, and we needed to focus on getting our hands in the earth. I thought to myself, how do we raise, you know, exponentially raise the emotional and environmental literacy of a whole generation of kids? You know, we need to set up Jedi training camps for eco warriors, and every kid that's going into the education system is going to leave in 10 years' time as a full-blown eco warrior. except they won't call themselves that because that will be the default system. Went to tell my friend who had this school. Turns out he's at the end of the Northern Line, just where kind of London becomes the countryside, and they had a 6-acre field that they weren't doing anything with. He said, you can take this field, you can do your community project on there. And then of course I was stood there, and other than this book that I'd read a week before, and my mum kind of telling me that you know the secrets were in the soil, I didn't really know what to do. And so I spent the next 6 months going around and talking to everybody who would talk to me about outdoor learning with kids. And pretty much all of them said to me, if you really want your project to land, of course there's going to be some kids who are really going to get blown away by growing carrots or whatever, but actually you've got to take a 360 holistic approach to the well-being of the child. And so over the course of the last 18 months, we've developed this practice that is called Grow, and we teach now as part of the curriculum. We've got 300 kids a week going through it on our pilot scheme. And yeah, we've got three pillars. So ground, which is about getting your hands in the dirt and getting outside and seeing how food's grown and how to look after animals and basic environmental studies. Think, which is about philosophical thinking. So unfortunately, because our one-size-fits-all education system's trying to knock everybody through an exam, funnel, it knocks all the creative and critical thinking out of kids. And then flow, which is about finding your inner power and your inner energy. So yoga, mindfulness, meditation, all that good stuff. And then finally, we've got Thrive, which is how you take ground, flow, and think into stuff that you love. So we have a boxing academy, a basketball academy, a YouTube club, all the stuff that the kids are into. And we've been going to 18 months really, and so far so good.
Sounds incredible. I think the point you made about working upstream really resonated with me. And of course, we have to deal with the immediate crisis, but we do need to keep asking ourselves, why are so many children being placed in this way? Why is our planet being placed in this way? And what can we do further up? And I think that's probably a big question for policymakers as well. And when you talk about the mutual dependence, that no matter how wealthy some people become, we never move away from our mutual dependence on this planet. And I think we're losing that. And I kind of love, I think as I say, I was a primary teacher myself for 11 years. I kind of love the idea of classrooms being Jedi training camps. I think that's brilliant. I think it's wonderful thing to ponder on. So I'm going to introduce Shaun now. And Shaun's McInerney has taught and led in inner city schools in the UK and international schools for 25 years. He's established the Studio, which is an innovative tech-focused state school for 14 to 19-year-olds in Liverpool, UK. So I'm really pleased that he's here to talk to us. So Shaun, I understand you're working with Ashoka and Edge to grow change-making education in the UK. So how does change-making tie into education and make the environment relevant to everyday learning? And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. And thanks, George, for that. New cliche of the day, a Jedi training camp, and I love that. I love to think of the Studio and the schools I've been involved in as that. And thank you, Tim, for that really insightful walk through your expansive understanding of the natural world and the inspiration that lies within it. So, in terms of your question, Emma, yeah, I'm doing some work with Ashoka, which is it's like the least known really of the world's 5 biggest NGOs. It kind of tends to work behind the scenes. Ashoka can lay claim really to inventing the term social entrepreneurship through the work that it did with social entrepreneurs, funding them in situ where they work in many different countries over the last 40 years. So it elects Ashoka fellows, and through those fellows, it identifies opportunities for community improvement and change, but also system change within the areas that those fellows are working. And what they found actually is that 90% of the fellows managed to engender system change to the work they're doing, which is really interesting. So I was struck, George, with what you were saying about going upstream, because my own journey into this really is from the education system and then stepping back and thinking, what are those underlying mindsets and skills that young people need, and how do we shape a system that enables that? Because one teacher in a classroom, one school leader in a school can't do that single-handedly. And that brought me to Ashoka and the exploration of changemaker skills. The Studio was elected as a changemaker school back in 2016. Last year, I worked developing a changemaker curriculum at United World College, Atlantic College, and it was great to see Tony there on the video talking about how those courses are taking hold down there in South Wales. And through those through the last few years, we've tried to understand what change making means from an educational perspective. And how do you have an education system that enables and empowers young people to step forward into their change making power, so that they're able to display the self-awareness, the empathy, and the critical understanding to make the positive changes in the communities that they want to see, and changes in their own lives too. And the thinking in Ashoka actually comes from the work from the fellows and the skills that they embody. And what seems really clear is that change-making skills are discernible, their mindsets, their dispositions, and they're really powerful levers. And the way they really, the way to summarize them are the skills of teamwork, of collaborative problem solving, of leadership, and most of all, of empathy. So the Ashoka Fellows that are supported really embody that empathy, and that empathy is evident in the programs and projects that they set up. And so if we're looking to think about how ecological sensitivity feeds into that, you know, the moment that Tim so nicely articulated about a new enlightenment, you know, is very much about young people stepping into that change-making power and using the context of their communities as the frame for that. And so I'm working with 15 UK changemaker schools, and then we're enrolling other educators into that process of discerning exactly how changemaker education looks in the classroom and building up a network of practice so that we can make a better system for everyone, really.
Thank you so much, and really empowering this idea of young people taking that power and making those changes. And it reminds me of, I was talking to a group of health professionals, and they were talking about some innovative work they were doing, and I said, how did you do this, or what, how are you able to do this? And they said, well, no one told us we couldn't. And I sometimes feel as a profession, and I still count myself as a teacher, as a profession, sometimes we wait for permission rather than thinking, well, no one's told us we can't do this, so let's just do it. And be a bit more braver, I think, and a bit more bold. And I think as a profession, we're so used to sort of waiting for permission, and maybe that's something for us all to think about. So going back to the questions for the panel, and Tim, who is I'm sure about there, lovely, as if by magic has reappeared. So you're first up on answering the question, what would you do to empower young people to tackle the climate crisis?
Well, I don't know about that. You've never seen me getting up and down. I've just been invaded by a baby Jenny Wren that fell down my chimney and is now crapping all over my chairs. And I was trying to catch it and get it out. So that didn't answer the question exactly, did it? What would I do to empower young people? Well, crikey, in Eastbourne recently, talking to the 5 schools in Eastbourne, they don't need empowering, except they almost need us oldsters, to stop treading on what they think they can do. I think a lot of us tread on people and say that they're naive and you can't do this and you can't do that. It is extraordinary how much people can do by not just their own lives, but actually by influencing. I think the Green Revolution is taking place right now in front of us. You know why? Because all of the people that run these big companies have been locked at home with their kids. So the kids, for the first time, the parents haven't been able to get away, and actually to get banged over the head every day about what they're doing. I certainly know that a lot of people I know have been banged over the head and have come back like, you know, they've the second coming for them. So it's, I think, bug older all the time, bug them all the time, and then actually look at people who don't do the right thing. You know what you need to do? You need to get them to criticize people like us who say that they're doing things that are an improvement. My friend Bill McDonough, who wrote a book called Cradle to Cradle, he gave a speech at the Royal Society last year, and he began it brilliantly. He said, if someone told you that your relationship was sustainable, please tell me how excited you are. You know, the point he was making is we've got to be more extreme. Let's talk about doing good rather than less bad. And I think that is the thing. Be unreasonable and ask for doing good, not less bad.
Very good. George, what do you think? What can we do to empower young people?
So I'm just getting that Will McDonough sustainable quote down, which is really good. So I think our first, you know, and Tim spoke to this a little bit earlier, but I think our first big battle is getting people to realise that we are nature, and we're not separate to it. And I think it doesn't matter how much of an urbanite you are. Everybody, providing they're eating food, has a touch point with the natural world every day. And so I think that's our route in, personally. And so I think we need to get our culinary literacy up, definitely. And I think just getting those, first steps, whenever we've been running Forest School, and Forest School traditionally, it's a really, really successful model of learning now, but Forest School's always been aimed at much younger kids. We've been using it, we're in a secondary school, we've been using it for kids who are having trouble transitioning. And invariably the first time they go out, I don't want to be out here, it's dirty, it's mucky, and they don't want to put the welly boots on, they don't want to put the jumpsuits on. And after 20 minutes of toing and froing, the next thing you know, they're climbed up a tree, they're covered in mud, they're starting, they're learning how to start fires, like it's innate, it's in all of us, and so the first trick is really about getting kids outside and getting them in nature, and then getting them to try different foods, and then getting them to learn how to cook things better, and just really expose them to this incredible world that's there, and they're actually part of. And then once you've been out there and you've experienced it, and it's touched you in a way that like very few things can, there's very few things that can resonate with you the way nature does when it really gets hold of you. I remember I was really lucky, I went to the Himalayas with my dad, when he was for his 60th birthday. And we went in the Annapurna range, and there's two of the only mountains in the world that are over 8,000 meters are in this range. When you see one of those things, like it's so humbling, and just so like the magnitude of this thing. It gives you so much perspective. And so whilst I think we should get everybody to go to the Himalayas at some point in their life. There's another variation of a Himalaya, within 20 miles of pretty much everybody. And we need to get kids outside, in touch with nature, and we need to get them eating better food. And when you eat better food, you feel better. And so, that's, I suppose, some ecosystem around kids outside, getting, learning how food's grown, learning how to cook food, which is really important, because you can give people the best ingredients in the world. If they don't know how to cook it, then it doesn't taste great, and then they don't want to go back into that whole kind of value chain. So yeah, that's my approach anyway.
Yeah, I think I certainly agree with that, and the idea there's nothing more powerful than a hands-on experience of anything, in that it can fundamentally change you. And I think we moved away, I think, in this last decade of taking children on. The trips became almost a dirty word, as something, it's a waste of time taking children on a trip. And I think we've lost that sense of, you can't, not all children are fortunate to have these incredible holidays all around the world. And so if the schools aren't going to take them and provide them these opportunities, they don't have them. And I think you're right, they can be life-changing. Sorry, Shaun, what are your thoughts on young people tackling the climate crisis?
I fully agree. Trips are really important. And if we ask young people, then they would certainly say that those experiences that they have that connect with nature are really important. So I think the short answer to this is actually to put kids in charge. That's how we can get young people to tackle the climate crisis. And I was really convinced of this a couple of weeks ago, even more if I needed to be, when there's a young change maker that Edge are working with called Elia York, and she interviewed Jim Knight, a former education secretary. And Jim told a story which was brilliant. He was so successful in getting down teenage pregnancy in the 1990s. I remember being a school leader in Liverpool where it was like 47 per 1,000. It was really, really high. And over a period of two to 3 years, it came down to 17 per 1,000. Now, how did he do that? Well, what he did was get young people into the department, sit them down with policymakers and with school leaders and say, what is it that you need in order to shift this? And, can you imagine kind of a world where young people are invited into the department and they help to co-create policies that they need? Because this is the climate is their issue, and the generational divide that exists around it really throws that into sharp relief. I think we've got a moral duty really to bring young people into the conversation and give them much more agency in the way that we're structuring things. And if we do that, we will get a different education system. I think that, you know, that is part of that enlightenment, a more enlightened education system, you know, that has those key connective experiences right at the heart of it.
Fantastic. I'm going to go back to you actually, George, to talk about, because obviously you've had a very varied career throughout your life. So what do you think could be done to make learning more relevant to life and work in the 21st century? Because you've obviously, as I say, had this really varied career, and now you're working with young children. And what could be done to make that more relevant? What children experience, what they're learning compared to what they'll go on and do in life?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all feels a bit abstract for kids when they're in a traditional learning environment, you know. And if you squint your eyes in most classrooms around the country, it's not much different what's going on to what would have been going on 200 years ago. And unfortunately, you know, for whatever reason, it's not moved at the pace it needs to move. And so, you know, we're all clear, and the reason we're here is because we all know there needs to be reform. So certainly, I mean, anecdotally, what I can tell you, so our first module this year was ground. We have an amazing mycologist leading our ground. Mycologist is a mushroom expert leading our ground module, and he was getting them all to propagate these little seed trays with these seeds. And a couple of weeks after we put them in, they were starting to germinate, and these little seedlings were there. And he was explaining to the class that if you brought these on for another week or two, each one of these would be worth £1. And, you know, half the class kind of turned around a little bit and started to pay attention. And then he said to them, right, and so if each one of these is worth £1, and there's how many in the tray? And they said 30. How much is the tray worth? Well, the tray's worth £30. And he said, and how much is the PS5 that you're after at the moment? And they said £350. He said, so how many trays do you need to do in order to get your PS5? And they were like 12. Boom! Everybody in the room was listening all of a sudden. And all of a sudden, this thing that had become, you know, was a kind of abstract, you know, looked like a biology experiment, looked like, you know, something they'd maybe done in primary school or whatever. All of a sudden, that became real world, and they had a route to getting the thing they're after. And it really made, and like the sharpness of the focus in the room, all of a sudden, I was like, right, okay, we're about to set up an enterprise initiative with these kids. And, you know, we're going to set up a whole thing so that instead of going to the garden centre, you can come down and buy the plants from us, and we'll give the kids a cut of what they make. And let's turn this into a real world thing. The amount of people who, when I tell them I'm doing Grow, they tell me, I wish I'd been told how to get a mortgage. I wish I'd been told how to sort my taxes out. I wish I'd been told how to, you know, run a house, you know, on and on and on and on, all the stuff that we're doing. And of course, there's lots of stuff from the current curriculum that does transfer over into life. But, you know, as I say, sometimes it's a bit abstract, and you just need to make it, you need to make it a bit more kind of obvious how this thing that you're learning is going to transition into your everyday life. And so that's why when we've got ground and flow and think, we built on this Thrive module, which is the extra curriculum bit. And it's about how you can weave all this stuff, or how we can weave our agenda into the things that the kids already like. So, you know, when, you know, school's the same as when you were at school. If you can get the inverted commas cooler kids to be into your thing, then a lot of kids will follow into it. When I go to the cooler kids and say to them, do you want to get involved with something where you're growing food and doing yoga and mindful? They're not really responding. When I say, do you want to do a boxing academy? I've got, you know, 50, 100 kids waiting outside. Well, you know, one of the first things we do is a nutrition module. So you have to come out onto the field and see how things are grown and get your hands dirty, right? You know, we do a whole sports psychology piece, which is about visualizations and focusing and winning, and, you know, winning mindset, and how, you know, before you know it, you're doing breath work and you're doing meditation. You know, and then we do a sports science, so different ways of moving your body, and you know, animal flow. And, you know, one of the big UFC fighters in the world now is a guy called Conor McGregor, and he works with one of the main movement experts in the world. So he's doing all sorts of kind of, you know, peculiar looking things writhing around on the floor. But you show Conor McGregor doing it, you've got your cosign with the kids. You know, so although they thought they were coming to a boxing class, actually they're learning all the different things that I wanted them to learn anyway. And I think, you know, really what we've got to try and do here is, rather than the old style system, which is kind of dominating the kids and then pushing your agenda onto them, we've got to find the stuff they're interested in and weave our agenda into that.
No, I think that's fantastic. Very, very inspiring. And again, I'm agreeing with what you're saying in that I think it's difficult sometimes to show the relevance to so many young people. But Shaun, what do you think, sort of as a practicing teacher, a head teacher, how can learning be made more relevant for young people?
Yeah, and I think we need a much better understanding and a shared understanding of the kind of world that we're preparing our young people for, you know. And that would be a really good starting point, you know, where sea levels are likely to rise by 1 metre by the end of the century. If you look at the global supply chain and the consumption habits that have really been laid bare within this COVID period, you know, those kind of restructurings are going to need to happen. And it's when you think of that, then it's really a massive gap that young people aren't consciously taught to process change. They're not made adaptable. They don't, you know, it's absent from the curriculum, and being relevant is absolutely part of that, because we need to anchor learning in the experience of young people, but also we need to kind of do that in a research informed way. And some of the interesting work that's come out of the Ashoka Fellows and the study of those, of what skills they have, are how important those meta skills are. The ability for young people to think about themselves, to separate themselves from the situation, to view the world as a system, to be able to think about different perspectives, not just their own perspective. And so, I mean, educators call that kind of metacognition. And it's the ability to learn how to learn, to be self-aware. Those are the transferable skills that young people need, and actually, you know, will find relevance in if they're placed in context. And, you know, there's something that George mentioned earlier, and it runs through everything that you're talking about really in terms of flow, and that's searching for purpose. And, you know, the curriculum I set up at Atlantic College last year, you know, started with that question, you know, what am I here for? You know, how do we connect with young people so that they can find their purpose? And then how can we move beyond the false dichotomies that exist in education at the moment, you know, between vocational and academic? It's not one or the other, it's both, you know. How can we move beyond the dichotomy of knowledge or skills? It's not knowledge or skills, it's both, and it's both at the same time. And then, you know, how can we move beyond the atomization that Tim talked about, in terms of how the preponderance of information, you know, that we're intending young people to learn in a knowledge-based curriculum is unfathomable to them. How can we help them to gain the richness of depth within that, so that they can become kind of technical generalists, which is what really young people need to be in order to solve the wicked problems in the world. So rather than having a knowledge curriculum, have a knowledge-rich, skills-based, context-driven curriculum that really nurtures purpose and professional skills along the way, so they have the wherewithal to make the change that they want to in the world.
Thanks very much. I thought that was really interesting, and there's some comments I'm following, or attempting to follow the comments in the chat as well, so do keep them coming in, because there's some fantastic comments being made there, and people talking about this learning to learn. Are we equipping children for this revolutionary change, which Tim referred to earlier, that we're going to have this shocking sort of decade ahead of us? How prepared are our young people? And as George was saying, how different are children's experience now in schools to the experience that we had, that our grandparents had, that our great-grandparents had? You know, you go back 100 years, how much has really changed? We have this revolutionary pace of change with automation and the changing world of work, and are we having that in our curriculum? So, Tim, recommendations of how can we make learning more relevant to life and work in the 21st century, thinking ahead, what can be done?
Well, I loved what the others have said. All I would add would be an observation. We were talking about old ways of learning, and I treated myself to a trip this year in February for a week. I went to what had been sold to me as the best company and the best charity in the world, and it was in Chennai, Bombay, as was in India, and it was called the Aravind Eye Hospital, which had been set up by a man who had been told, who was an eye surgeon who suffered from Parkinson's, so he could no longer operate, and he was depressed, and he went into a McDonald's. And as he was sitting in this McDonald's, he suddenly had this lightning moment of what happens if hospitals were designed like McDonald's. And the Aravind Hospital is astonishing, absolutely astonishing. They train 300 young women to become nurses and 300 to operate the most skillful factory I've ever seen. And they provide sheltered space for them to learn in, outside and inside. But the most extraordinary, the thing I wanted to share with you is on the very last day, they do 2 operations on poor people for every operation on a rich person they do. And they've done 36 million cataract operations over the last few years. And when you watch the operations, we went into a viewing area, and I'm very squeamish. They had 3 different operating theaters, 2 gurneys, 2 patients at once. The surgeon comes in like a rock star, the gloves on, the tools. He does a stopwatch starts. He takes a cataract out in 2 minutes and 48 seconds. He throws with flamboyance the cutting tools back into the kidney tray. Off come the gloves, new gloves. And then he does the next thing, and a new gurney comes in. They do 100 times more operations than the National Health Service. But on the very last day, the 6th day, the boss of Google Asia came to talk to us. And he said, do you know how extraordinary it is to have 36 million pictures of eyeballs, and then they give you the medical records of those people, and you then show suddenly that if your vein looks like that, it's a symptom of a cardiac problem coming up 3 years down the line. And it's the first time in my life I'd actually seen with my own eyes the extraordinary power of big data. And the guy from Google was saying, there are 2 things we're looking for. We're looking for people who can ask the right question. It's the skill of asking the right question. And he said, he said, I believe we're living in a world where most of us are trying to deal with symptoms and we're missing causes. And some people are confusing symptoms with causes. And I would say part of the joy of teaching that I watch when I watch it in front of me, people doing really well, it's about the classic mentoring, isn't it? That where a great teacher enables the pupil to feel as if they've been on a journey, but it's a journey which they've contributed enough to, so it leaves an imprint on the soul. It's a kind of weird thing. I also wanted to say, because this is all about the environment, for teachers, remember the first school started by Plato was in the garden of the hero Academus, because Plato believed you could not teach except in the face of nature. And that's how the words academia and academy came from. So if anybody's worried about whether environment should be at the heart of it, our mate Plato, he thought so, and he knew a thing or 2, didn't he? He was a clever cove.
Definitely. There's been a quick question come in, Tim, and I wonder if you can just quickly ask it, because I've been asked a couple of times to mention it to you, which is, what are the implications on soil health if we take farm animals out of the cycle?
Now, that's a really interesting question. I have been to a farm in Ireland in the shadow of New Grange, the great megalithic tomb, which was totally destroyed. And they've rebuilt it, and they've got farm animals and they've got deer, but it's much more modest. And they do what's called mob grazing, which it was realized by a guy who'd killed 44,000 elephants. Suddenly had a road to Damascus moment, and he suddenly realized that elephants were great, wildebeest were great, because they ate the grass right down to a stub. They crapped on it, they pissed on it, and then they, with their hooves, they poached it together. And that actually was ideal for sending the roots down deep and for the stuff to regrow. And it's at that point, the whole thing about mob grazing came in. And that's why the bison were able to be good in the prairies. And the Indians knew this. They knew. And you know where else they've known this? In the Yellowstone Park, where they introduced wolves, and the deer were killing all new growth. And the wolves made the deer want to stick really close together and move together as a bunch. And because of that, they didn't generally graze everywhere. They moved as a team across the landscape, which has enabled Yellowstone to completely regenerate itself. So I don't think we're going to see the end of livestock farming. I think what we're going to see is very particular livestock farming, where the animals are particularly well treated and looked after. I think one of the things we've underestimated massively is why veganism and vegetarianism is catching on. A lot of it is not spiritual in the old-fashioned sense. It's to do with they've just had enough of seeing the industrialization of death. And actually, if you take my gardens at Heligan, where we have a rare breed park, we do slaughter some of our stock, but my staff take the animals to slaughter, and they will only be slaughtered if there are no other animals there. I think there's a spiritual thing about if creatures are going to die for you, let them have a very good death and treat them with respect. And I think that is going to come back in a big way. So I think there's going to be much less livestock growing. Livestock can be very good for the soil if you've got a farming practice which isn't subsidizing the current methods of getting your grass to go with a lot of nitrate and stuff injection into the soil. You know, the secret, one of the great secrets is the injection of pig's urine with the ammonia removed. It's very groovy stuff. I bet you a lot of people watching this didn't know that. Pig's piss rules.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Every day's a learning day. So I'm going to finish up by asking our three panelists to tell us, well, I'm going to combine two questions in one, so you'll have to forgive me for this. So I want to hear about a standout lesson from a teacher from your own, your experience, your college, university days, and what made it special. Sort of what really stood out to you? Why did it have an impact on you? And also, what one thing can all educators do to change the world? So what experience have you had that's had an impact upon you, and why has it been so special? And what, if there's one thing, all these educators listening, and many of them are taking part in the chat, what's the one thing they could do to change the world? So I'm going to ask Shaun first for your personal experience and then your call to action. What can we do?
I think the personal experience, actually last year down at Atlantic College, when we were setting up a Changemaker curriculum, we had the challenge of trying to put the underlying skills in place. And we needed to get a really good understanding, a shared understanding of what systems thinking is. So I introduced these students to a wonderful woman who runs Thoughtbox Education, a woman called Rachel Musson. And Rachel came down and did a knockout session on systems thinking and put us in all sorts of different scenarios. And the reason that was significant, I think, is because the takeaway for the students came when we were doing this thing around a kind of visualization around being in the traffic jam. And they realized that the anxiety that they felt from that scenario, that we normally kind of point the finger at and say it's their fault, the roads aren't big enough, the system's not right. Actually, that starts with us. You know, that you know, we're not in traffic, but we are the traffic. And that realization for students was really powerful because of the skillful way that she set it up. And I think the significance of that is that within the education system, we need more opportunities for reflexivity. You know, we need to be able to reflect and see ourselves within the systems that we operate. And it's going to be very difficult to do that unless we make one change. And that change is to have much more real world and project-based learning within the curriculum. And so that's my advice to teachers, is to do whatever it takes to have a much more interdisciplinary approach to teaching and learning, because that opens up this world of opportunity to have context-based rich learning, and also to put young people at the centre of wicked problems and get them to solve things and grapple with it. And the cognitive richness of that process ticks every Ofsted box that you could care to tick, but also, you know, puts young people in the driving seat. And if I could just mention one more thing, and that is picking up on something that Tim said earlier about the fact that this new enlightenment, the new focus we're going to have on environmental education and eco-literacy, is also a huge opportunity. You know, we need 3 million plus green sector jobs in the UK over the next 10 years. And we shouldn't start, it's an opportunity to start seeing vocational education as part of the sustainability solution. And young people who can both have eco-literacy, rich skills and mindsets, and also the technical skills that go with it, are going to be in a really, really strong position.
Thanks very much. And just to warn everyone, I'm in Parliament, and the security update has informed me that I have 5 minutes before they shut me down and install an urgent security update. So if I disappear, that's where I've gone. Please don't take it personally. But George, so same question for you. Standout lesson, and what's your call to action? What can educators do to change the world?
Sorry, that's my bad. I'm wittering away, but I was muted. I suppose it's a bit more meta, really, than just like one experience that I had. When like all schools, for a multitude of reasons, there can be all sorts of amazing people there and amazing kids and all the rest of it. But like culturally, things go off on the wrong path. And when Mr. Fairburn, our head teacher, and the senior leadership team who he arrived with came to the school, unfortunately, as I said, it was it had been struggling with its reputation for kind of 20 odd years, and the subscription was really down, less than 50%. And the first thing that they did then, and everybody says how they've gone from the bottom 5% in the country to the top 5% in the country for progress within 5 years, and everybody says, oh, how did you do it, and what's the difference and what's the change? And Chris just talks a lot about level of expectation. Just going to school isn't going to cut it, so and obviously there's tiers of it, but you have to set your bar high. And there's actually he shows a video at the beginning of every term, same video. It's a PlayStation advert, weirdly, and it's an old science experiment, and they show these fleas jumping around in a pot, and the fleas are jumping way higher than the edge of the top of the pot, and then they put a lid on it, and the fleas jump around, and they hit the top of the pot, and then they take that off, and the lid's no longer there, but the fleas only jump to the level at the top of the pot because that's the level of expectation that's been set for them. So really, for me, I suppose, watching the actual process of the level of expectation being set higher is both the practice and also my call to arms. We are faced with all kinds of incredible problems, and we as a species are probably only using 5 to 10% of our capacity. I watched a guy last night. I watched Free Solo again. I don't know if you've ever watched it. It's about a guy who climbs El Capitan ropeless, which is this huge cliff face in Yosemite. I watched Simone Biles, the amazing, the most successful gymnast in history. You see people in all kinds of disciplines. They're not superhumans. They're not made from something different. They've just gone into themselves and found a resource and been able to dig deeper. And now they're using, a whole set of potential. They're unlocking that potential in them that most people are walking around and not getting into. And so it's there in abundance. We've got it, and we just need to unlock it. And so teachers, keep doing what you're doing. Remember that you're amazing. Remember, as Tim said, that you are some of the most important people in society. And even if society doesn't quite see it, you need to see it in yourself. And let's set the expectation level high, and let's push these kids, because they can be and do anything. That's it.
Brilliant. That's a good call to arms. Tim, I've only left you with 1 minute, I'm afraid. But in 1 minute, just a minute, can you very quickly standout lesson and call to action?
I think the best lesson is nothing to do with being at school. It was my friend John Rose, who was the boss of Rolls-Royce, who couldn't work out why, with all his senior management team, when they had workshops, all that ever happened was that they were getting policy by osmosis and no good ideas. And he sat down next to a psychologist at a dinner party once randomly. And the psychologist said that for a serious person, supposedly a glamorous captain of industry, you are remarkably ignorant. So do you not know there is only one question worth knowing if you are a leader, if you want to get everybody to be with you? And that question is, how can we improve this? That question gives permission to everybody around you to then realize the boss does not have the best answer. So everybody then participates. He said it revolutionized workshops at Rolls-Royce. And I think all of us who have a lot of colleagues and youngsters to look out for, it's a lesson well worth doing. It stops you being overrated, and it's humbling.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. And I think the call to arms is definitely a call to arms, and there's going to be change. It's going to be shocking, but there is also, with that change, opportunity. As the pace of change outside the world of education gains in pace, then we need to be doing the same in our schools. And let's not wait for permission either. If we can do it, let's do it, and let's do it quickly. Over to you, Alice.
Thank you very much, Emma. In case, Emma, you have to leave before I've done my thanks, so I just want to say a huge thank you to you for chairing the event, for being part of this, for your comments and your interaction. It's been hugely enjoyable. Enjoy your security update. Thank you so much for joining us from Parliament today, and I will see you really soon. To the rest of the panelists, thank you so much for your participation. There were moments during this where I've actually felt quite emotional. For me, the natural world is my escape, my solace. It's a vital part of my life. And listening to the things you say make me realise that it is so important we make this available for everybody, young or old, and that attachment to the real world, to the natural world, is incredibly important for our health, well-being, and our future. The discussion has been invigorating, it's been thought-provoking, and it's been real. And it's been one of the most enjoyable events that I've had the privilege to interact with this year. So thank you so much. I want to cross over to Eleanor, who has been busy all the way through this discussion, to see how you've got on.
Yeah, sorry, I'm a bit hot. I'm panicking then, trying to get things ready. I'll just try and share screen, bear with me.
Thank you, Eleanor.
Okay, so this is where I am at the moment. So obviously with it, a slight lag, because I've had to listen and then catch up. So I'll leave that bottom section out now for the panel we've just had. But yeah, can you see it all? Can you see that?
Certainly the panel can see that. I'm sure the audience can too. It looks absolutely amazing, Eleanor. Your eyes kind of dart all around it, so it's really difficult to kind of take it all in one go. And we've already had some comments in the comments box saying how beautiful it is. So
thank you.
It's really lovely and so beautiful to see it evolving as we've been talking. This was a new innovation that Susan, who works at the Edge Foundation, came up with, and she spoke to Eleanor, and I'm absolutely delighted she has, because I think this is going to be a beautiful piece of both art and fact that will capture today's event. Thank you so much, Eleanor. We will make sure that you can see the full piece of Eleanor's work as part of an event resource pack that will also provide examples of schools, colleges, and organisations that successfully use the environment as a context for learning. It also contains ideas for projects and will signpost to organisations and helpful learning resources for educators, parents and caregivers looking to offer outdoor education. And we'll add a link in the chat for this now. I needed to thank Emma before she went, but in her absence, I want to reiterate how grateful we are to have Emma Hardy MP for chairing today's event and for her insightful comments. I would like to thank Sir Tim Smit for an incredible thought-provoking piece, which I think highlighted the importance of that big thought. And will have generated a lot of discussion, both amongst our audience with us here today, but also we're recording this, so we will share this with those people who weren't able to join us today. And to quote George, I think it's been a shot in the arm, just the sort of inspiration and the kick up the backside, if any of us needed it, to crack on with 2021 with new vigour and new determination. I also feel that we need one more cliche, and that is the phrase that's used all the time, which is experience over things. But it feels like we're always saying that it's just something that trips off the tongue. We've got to convert that to real life, and to make that a part of everything we do in school, in university, in further education, but also in life. I want to thank also the students that participated in the video from XB School in Doncaster, UWL Atlantic College, and the Eden Project. Of course, to Eleanor for her beautiful piece of artwork, which we can't wait to see finished, and we will share with all of you. And to George Lamb and Shaun McInerney, thank you so much for your participation, for your wise words and your comments. If you've enjoyed this lecture, please do sign up on the Edge website to stay in touch. On the 27th of January, we'll be hosting a discussion around rethinking assessment. And I saw lots of comments in the chat around exams and the cliff edge at 16. If this is of interest to you, then you should join us on the 27th. Our special guest there will be Robert Halfon MP. The links will appear in the chat, but that's all from us today. Just lastly, for me to wish you a happy and healthy Christmas, and to say to take care, look after yourselves, and goodbye.